Hey, where do you think you're touching? It's fine, isn't it? In our shower room, my husband and a coworker of his were getting a bit too cozy. We just exchanged our vows at the wedding yesterday. And now look at him. He's probably already obsessed with her. Maybe I should let everyone see what's really going on. My name is Karen. I love pudding so much that I started making it myself. And now I even own a store at the age of 40. I never imagined I'd go from being an ordinary office worker to running my own bakery. But here I am. After all the hardships I faced when I was younger, I'm determined to find happiness from now on. What? You want to know what kind of hardships I went through? Well, that takes us back a few years. I ended up marrying Paul, who's been my boyfriend since my late 20s. We met at work, and even though we both kinda knew we liked each other, things didn't progress for a while because, workplace romance can be tricky. I mean, you think about stuff like, will it bother everyone else? Or what if I'm wrong about his feelings? So I kept my feelings to myself for about 6 years before I finally decided to confess and just move on. But it turned out he liked me all along, and we started dating. Not long after, we moved in together. And by our 3rd year of dating, he proposed. You think that's slow? Well, there were work things and other stuff going on. We had times when we could barely even go on dates because we didn't want anyone at work to see us. But still, I believed that our serious relationship would lead to a happy marriage with Paul. Then 2 months after we announced our wedding at work, she showed up. Hi everyone, I'm Betty, and I'm new to this department. I've never done sales before. Actually, I've never worked at all. And I don't really want to start now. She said this with a big smile, flashing peace signs next to her face, looking like someone who didn't quite grasp what a professional workplace was. Apparently, she missed a company's orientation because she showed up with hair dyed some wild color, completely ignoring the dress code. Her hair was back to a more normal color by the time she introduced herself, so she must have dyed it quickly or sprayed it just to look right. Oh, and her skirt? Way too short, clearly altered. She claimed she didn't want to work, but our department is sales. There was no way we could let her visit clients like that. We all wondered how someone like her even made it through the hiring process. If she had gotten in through connections, it would have made sense, but that wasn't the case. The turnover in sales was high, but things were getting desperate due to our staffing shortages. Karen, I don't get Excel at all. Betty came to me with a question. What part don't you understand? I don't even know what I don't understand. That's how it is at first. I'll go over it with you, and we can take it step by step. Huh, you're not going to do it for me. You want me to do it, what? I was stunned by Betty's response. It's your work, right? I said, trying to make her understand. Well, it's not really my work, is it? It's just that the company happened to assign it to me, but it's not really my responsibility, right? If you think like that, you won't get any work done. We have to change this kind of mindset, or the company is just going to keep going downhill. She spouted off some half-baked logic that made it really hard to deal with her. Honestly, I wanted to snap back with something like, it's not my job to fix your attitude either, but I held back, knowing it would be immature. The difficult person joined us today. In the end, I had no choice but to force Betty, who flat out refused to work, into learning the job anyway. A few hours later, the person who came to report that the work was finished wasn't Betty, but my colleague, Tom. Where's Betty? I asked. Betty went home. What? Why? She said her pet was having stomach issues. Whether that's true or not, I don't even know how to react. Who allowed her to leave for such a reason? No one, actually. I was speechless at his response. Seeing my reaction, I get it. I really do, he said with a strained smile. I couldn't find her after a while, so I checked her desk and found a note about why she left. That's when I decided to take on her work. What? I can't believe this. What does she even think this job is? A game, probably. Tom laughed in disbelief while I stood there, fuming. Then Paul, what's going on? Something happened. Came over. The new hire. Calm down. Who are we talking about? Betty. I've been in meetings all day, so I barely saw her. Is there an issue? Tom responded, so far, she's been nothing but trouble. To Paul's question, Paul's face tensed up. Really? He muttered. Paul, why don't you take over her training? You handled Jim really well back then. Paul scratched his head. As Tom suggested it, Jim was someone who had trouble with both language and numbers. He lacked any sense of etiquette and was just the worst. But when Paul took over his training and worked with him one-on-one, Jim ended up becoming one of the top performers in the sales department. He's still bad with numbers, so we all help him out in that area. The boss, overhearing Tom's suggestion. So Paul, you'll take over training Betty. I was just thinking about who to assign to that. Suddenly jumped into the conversation. Assign? More like shove it onto me without asking first. Paul replied. And he wasn't wrong. With Jim, too, it had been basically forced on him, despite his many protests. Come on, Paul, you're the best person for the job. The boss insisted, leaving Paul with no choice but to take on Betty's training. I couldn't help but think how tough it must be for Paul. Paul, let's go to lunch together, Betty said, pressing her chest against Paul's arm. Needless to say, I wasn't too thrilled about the sight. Ever since Paul became Betty's trainer, she's been all over him. Of course, since he's her direct supervisor, and they have to work closely together, I tried to brush it off, thinking this was just part of the job. I tried to be understanding, but no matter how I looked at it, Betty's behavior was far from professional. She would pretend to stumble just to throw herself into Paul's arms. And not even an hour after he took over her training, her blouse had 2 extra buttons undone. In the end, she made it blatantly clear, Paul, you're so handsome. You're just my type. Or even, I wish I could go out with someone like you, Paul. She was really laying it on thick. Our colleagues all knew about our relationship. Doesn't that bother you? So much so that some even asked me. Of course it does. But since Paul had been rejecting her advances and setting boundaries, I decided to keep quiet about it, even though Betty was clearly overstepping. Don't touch my husband isn't something you say in the workplace. I didn't want our relationship to make things awkward for everyone at work. And mixing personal matters with business wasn't what I wanted either. So I kept quiet. But, Betty, you're getting way too close to Paul. Paul is married to Karen, so you need to be careful with how you're acting around him. Even if they weren't married, this is a workplace. It's really uncomfortable to watch this kind of behavior. It was my coworker, Jane, who said this. She had been worried for some time about how Betty was getting overly close to Paul, even though he was my husband. And it seemed like she finally couldn't stand it any longer. The rest of the office didn't say anything, but the way they nodded and exchanged glances told me they were thinking the same thing. I thought, maybe now Betty will finally understand the situation. But then, and how is that any of my business? Betty's response left Jane stunned. I think we all wore the same expression of shock. Why should I have to adjust my behavior just because 2 people in the office decided to get married? No, that's not the point here. Jane's voice suddenly raised, and everyone froze in shock. She's always so calm, never the type to get angry. Oh, Then what is the point? Why am I the only one being blamed? I don't get it. We're saying that it's uncomfortable to watch you constantly getting too close to Paul. Then maybe you should stop looking. Are you the type of person who complains about a TV show being boring but still watches until the final episode? Betty laughed, clearly enjoying the situation. You could see the frustration in Jane's face. Betty, you're in the wrong here. Paul stepped in and pointed out. If Paul says so, then I guess I'll back off a little. But oh, it's going to be so lonely. She smiled and took a small step away from Paul. But her behavior was still unsettling in a way that had the female employees instantly united against her. Paul gave a helpless look and said, "Let's just get back to work." "Sure thing," Betty said, gleefully following him. I felt a powerful urge to pull her away from Paul right then and there, but I held back. Of course, Betty continued to cling to Paul after that. Even when Paul tried to step away, she stayed uncomfortably close. I'm not usually the jealous type, but this was way out of line. Paul even apologized to me. "I'm sorry about this." He looked genuinely remorseful. I knew Paul had no interest in Betty, and I wanted to stay calm. But I was so angry. If only Betty could be useful enough at work to distance herself from Paul. But that didn't seem likely anytime soon. As I was struggling with what to do, something happened. "What? You sent the email to the wrong client." Paul's voice echoed through the office. I looked over to see Betty, for once, looking down and sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. I was surprised to see her like this. Who knew she could actually feel guilty? But as I learned more, I realized just how bad the situation was. Betty had accidentally sent confidential information meant for Client A to Client B, which meant she had leaked Client A's info to their competitor. It was a serious data breach, and both companies were rivals. The worst possible scenario. Paul let out a long sigh and covered his face with his hands. "We're going to apologize to both companies. Betty, you'll come with me." "Yes, if they're going to visit both companies outside the city. It's a trip for the two of them. I really hate it, but since Betty's name was in the email, the company's policy says both the manager and the person at fault must apologize together, so there's no choice." I hurriedly sent Paul a message, "Take care," and quietly watched him leave. After that, Paul and Betty were busy writing reports about the issue, discussing future measures, holding meetings, and dealing with the cancellation of contracts they had previously secured. Because Betty was completely incapable of handling work, Paul, who was already swamped with other tasks, had even more on his plate. Perhaps out of guilt, Betty started taking her work more seriously, staying late alongside Paul. This all happened just 1 month before our wedding. Their work seemed never-ending, day and night blending together. And it was so hectic that there was a real possibility Paul would not be able to take time off for the wedding. The company that had received the leaked information was apparently furious. And not only did they handle multiple projects with us, but now they were considering whether they should continue doing business with us at all. In an effort to rebuild trust between the companies, Paul and Betty, along with our boss, went to the client's offices nearly every week to discuss the company's situation and outline future plans. Because of this, the number of days when I didn't see Paul grew. To think this is happening right before our wedding. Most of the messages I sent him went unanswered, but with how busy he was, it made sense. He probably didn't even have time to glance at his smartphone before collapsing into bed. If he was even getting any sleep at all. I was worried, but I tried to convince myself that this was just another trial for us as a couple. Until one day, "Hey, have you noticed something lately?" "You think so too?" Paul and Betty seem pretty close, don't they? I stopped in my tracks when I overheard my coworkers chatting in the break room. What? But it's all work, right? They're staying late because of that issue, right? Well, actually, I heard things have calmed down quite a bit on that front. Sure, there are some loose ends to tie up, but it sounds like Betty's been surprisingly useful. Wait, what? Are you saying it's the power of love or something? Don't make me laugh. Come on, that's not possible. Carl and Karen are getting married the day after tomorrow. Yay, you're right. You've been watching too many cheating dramas. Maybe have a little more faith in people. They laughed again, but I couldn't laugh at all. Everyone knew Paul and Betty had been busy. That much was true. There was no time for an affair. Or so I thought. But when you spend that much time alone with someone, it does make you wonder. I had never questioned it before, but hearing my coworkers' words made me look at everything in a different light. Paul and Betty were out on a business trip again today. There were official records showing their meetings with the client, so it wasn't a lie, and there were traces of communication between the client and our company, confirming the interactions. So, no, it really wasn't a lie. Paul was going to make it to the wedding, but there was a dinner with the client the night before, so he wouldn't be back until the day of the wedding. Is this really true? I wanted to trust Paul, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. It must have been affecting me emotionally. I ended up falling sick. I felt childish, but I couldn't focus on my work. I ended up leaving work early the day before the wedding, and then the wedding day arrived. Paul and Betty arrived at the venue together in the same taxi. I blurted out, Paul, looking completely unbothered. Oh, I just came along since we were headed to the same place. Casually replied. I mean, it's not a weird thing, but after overhearing that conversation in the break room, it just doesn't sit right with me. I started thinking I shouldn't have invited Betty to the wedding at all. But then again, the company basically forced us to invite everyone, so there wasn't much I could do about it. Paul wanted to take a shower, so we hurried to ask the venue if we could use one of the hotel rooms attached to the place. After freshening up, Paul changed into his tuxedo, and I got my makeup done, and we both rushed off to greet the guests. It was non-stop. Before we knew it, the entire day had passed, and we barely had a moment to talk. I'm exhausted. Paul dove into the bed the moment we got home after the reception and the after party. You really worked hard today. It was quite the event, I said to him, and Paul replied, Yay, seriously, still with his face buried in the bed. Yep, that's the Paul I know. That strange conversation between my coworkers, it's probably just rumors after all. So I decided to bring it up lightly. The other day, I heard some coworkers talking about something weird. Weird? Paul glanced over at me. Yeah, they were saying there's something going on between you and Betty. I was shocked. I mean, of course, that's not true, right? I laughed, but Paul's expression suddenly tightened with a nervous look. That reaction felt off. Oh my God. And I instinctively muttered. Paul quickly followed up. No, I was just so surprised by such an unexpected thing. He laughed awkwardly. Then, he changed the topic. It's not strange to be caught off guard by something unexpected. But why did it seem like he was momentarily speechless because he got caught? I want to believe Paul, but my gut is telling me something's wrong. The next day, Carl, who had worked tirelessly up until the wedding, was finally taking some days off. As he saw me off with a strained smile, I couldn't quite return a natural smile either. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. It was bugging me as I went into work. Hey, Karen, have you heard anything from Betty today? Tom asked me. About what? Well, she hasn't shown up yet, and it's almost starting time. Oh, actually, it's past time now. What? At first, Betty used to arrive just on time or even late sometimes. But ever since that incident, she'd been making sure to show up early, starting work before the shift even began. Do you think it's an unexcused absence that's a problem? Tom said, clearly concerned. Yay, it really is. I was about to agree, but a terrible feeling washed over me. Paul had the day off, and now Betty was absent without notice. Can I really call that just a coincidence? Sorry, could I maybe leave early today, even just during lunch? Is something wrong? It's just, I couldn't exactly tell him I had a bad feeling and needed to leave because of that. I was stumbling over my words when, Karen, weren't you supposed to take time off after the wedding anyway? Paul felt bad for taking time off too, so you came in, but it's not busy, so go ahead, take the day off. Tom smiled warmly as he said it, and I responded, thank you, with all the gratitude I could muster. The others also chimed in. You haven't been feeling well recently, so take a few days off if you need. Thanks to everyone's kindness, I gratefully accepted the chance to leave early. I'm home. I opened the front door, but I couldn't move. At the entrance, there was a woman's umbrella. Or rather, it was Betty's umbrella. I remembered her saying it was her favorite, though she had accidentally scratched it. The scratch is in the exact same spot. There's no way someone else would have the exact same umbrella with the exact same scratch. Oh no, that sinking feeling in my chest. I was right after all. But I don't have time to feel sorry for myself right now. I need to find out why Betty is here, in my house, of all places. Even though it's my home, I moved as quietly as possible, like a thief, trying not to make any noise. Where are they? They weren't in the living room. Could they be? In the bedroom. Horrible scenarios kept running through my mind, each one worse than the last. And then the worst case scenario became reality. Come on, stop doing that. You're enjoying it too, aren't you, Betty? Anything you do makes me happy, Paul. You're so cute when you say things like that. Come here. No, stop it. Their voices, full of excitement, echoed from the bathroom. The clothes they had taken off were scattered on the floor in the changing room. Of all the places to cheat, they had to do it in the house I live in, the day after our wedding, no less. At least have the decency to hide it better. Or, do they not even care if I find out? Do they not care if they hurt me? I was boiling with anger and sorrow. My heart was a complete mess. I wanted to break down and cry, but I held back the tears. I was about to burst in on them, catch them in the act, but not now. Suddenly, I felt myself calm down. That's right. If they're going to do something this terrible to me, then they deserve the worst. I can't be the only one suffering here. That wouldn't be fair. First, I locked the bathroom door from the outside, making sure they couldn't see me. I used 2 tension rods at the top and 2 at the bottom. I had bought them a few days ago for redecorating. Who knew they'd come in handy now? I want to thank myself for buying them. Then I locked the door to the changing room as well, so even if they managed to get out of the shower, they wouldn't be able to leave the changing room. And then I just left them there. Paul. Even from a distance, I could hear Betty's voice. She sounded panicked, yelling as loudly as she could. The door won't open. She was desperately calling for help. I couldn't hear Paul's voice. He was probably thinking, there's no way it won't open. I'll handle it, or something like that. After a few minutes, oh no, Paul's voice ran out. It sounded like he finally realized that the door wasn't going to open. I could hear all sorts of loud noises. They must have tried everything to get out. When nothing worked, they started to panic. Oh no, what if Karen comes home? What are we going to do? Maybe we should try breaking the door down. Don't. If we break it, I won't be able to explain it to Karen. Then how are we supposed to get out of here? Listening to their exchange, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. They were really panicking. Good, I'm going to make them suffer even more. By evening, the two of them had started fighting. Why did you suggest we take a bath together? This is all your fault, Paul. I never thought it would turn out like this. This is bad. Karen's going to come home any minute. I'm well aware of how bad it is. But we're stuck, so there's nothing we can do. Why can't you open this door? You're supposed to be a man. That's not the point right now. No guts to even break down a door. You're such a coward. Coward. So you'd rather Karen find out about the affair? Is that all I mean to you? Then why don't you just tell her? I can't do that. Then get us out of here. I'm scared. Betty's sobbing could be heard clearly now. The conversation was breaking down, showing how overwhelmed she was by the situation. Who visits someone else's house when their spouse is away? But they can't think this is the worst it could get. It's already getting dark. But why hasn't Karen come back? She gets off work at 6 p.m. Paul was the first to notice this. Betty, come to think of it, you're right, said with a nervous tone. It was the perfect moment. I've been here the whole time. What? Their fear was palpable as my voice echoed from the hallway. The sound of water splashing could be heard, suggesting someone had been in the bathtub. That voice. Karen. Yes, it's me. Paul's voice was trembling. Betty remained silent. She probably thought hiding would help. Welcome to our home, Betty. What? Betty's fear intensified, leaving an umbrella boldly at the front door, and yet she still thought she could hide. Foolish. I thought you might escape through the shower, so I sealed off the hallway as well. But in the end, you couldn't get out. That's good. You locked us in, Karen. Paul's shocked voice rang out. Yes. Who else could get in and do all this? Or wait, Paul, have you invited other women here too? No, I swear. It's not like that. There's nothing going on with Betty. Nothing going on after taking a bath together. Do you think I'm stupid? Bathing together clearly qualifies as cheating. As a woman, I can't just overlook this. We only shared a bath. That's it. What a childish excuse, especially in a situation like this. Even if that were true, I hate it. Listening to the two of you, all your interactions sounded like a couple in a relationship. That's not enough already. I don't need your excuses. What? I'm ready. Ready for what? Before Paul could finish his sentence, I opened the door to the shower room. Paul shouted in shock, and Betty scrambled to cover herself. Their faces turned ghostly pale immediately after. It was all so sudden, I couldn't get everyone but the people from our wedding. A lot of them showed up, didn't they? You can't be serious. Paul's despair was undeniable. As soon as I confirmed their affair, I contacted his company, my parents, and even his parents. Why would you? Paul said, his voice filled with dread. For the divorce party we're about to have, I said with a smile, watching Paul shake. Divorce party. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. Now let's start the divorce party between me and Paul. Cheers erupted from the room as I made the announcement. Paul and Betty stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. We can put some clothes on, right? Paul, now more composed, asked in desperation. What? I thought you loved taking baths. Paul loves them so much, he'll even bathe with random women. Maybe he should just stay in there forever. Shall we begin our party? Betty, you lied to me, didn't you? The first person to speak was the supervisor from another department. He was someone who had worked with both Paul and Betty to try and resolve the issue. In an instant, Betty's face turned ghostly white, and she began to tremble. Henry, Betty whispered in a small, trembling voice. Henry, with a cold, menacing expression, said, "You told me you loved me, didn't you?" "Vi, I had a change of heart." "A change of heart?" "No, that's not it. You were making a move on Paul while you were still coming after me too." Everyone was shocked by Henry's words. It turns out that after they began going on work trips together, Henry started to fall for Betty. He said he was impressed by the way she worked so hard, facing every mistake head on. "Is that how people from other departments see it?" thought my team, feeling a sudden wave of sympathy for Henry. Betty, sensing this shift, had suddenly confessed her feelings to Henry, and soon after, they had started dating. But as we all know, Betty had liked Paul since practically the day she joined the company. This was a case of two timing. Even Paul was furious now. "What the hell is going on, Betty?" in the heavy atmosphere. This is really hard to say," Tom began, breaking the silence. "Betty, you've got another boyfriend, don't you?" "What?" At Tom's accusation, once again, everyone but me was left speechless. "What? None of you knew?" "Karen, you know what I'm talking about, right? We saw them together, didn't we?" "That's right." There was a reason I never doubted Paul's fidelity. During a client visit, Tom and I had seen Betty, who was supposed to be off that day, out on a date with a man who clearly looked like her boyfriend. At the time, Betty was frequently leaving work without permission and playing with her phone during office hours, all of which I assumed was related to her boyfriend. She seemed to like Paul, but it was clear she was also keeping other guys as potential love interests. But at the time, Paul wasn't paying her much attention, and Betty was the type to get obsessed with whoever she liked, so I figured any signs would be obvious. I never imagined she was the kind of woman who could date multiple people at the same time. "Betty, what is this all about?" Paul and Henry pressed Betty for answers. Betty could only cry silently, unable to say a word. "And while we're at it, I found something else today. Betty, care to explain this?" Betty looked stunned at my question. Cries followed my hand as I held out my smartphone, but she didn't seem to understand. "My social media account. What's the big deal?" "So you found my real name on there." "It's not a problem. The problem is that you used your real name." Betty, you've been posting all kinds of details about our clients, including future deals, and what we're planning to do with them." Everyone turned pale at my words. Meanwhile, "But it's just like a personal diary." "What's wrong with that?" Betty genuinely looked confused and said, "You're leaking confidential information, Betty." What? No way. How could you do this to me?" "You revealed both our company name and the names of our clients. And to top it off, you used your real name. Now everything is out in the open. No one even looks at my social media. If they search by your real name, it'll pop up immediately. In fact, that's how I found it so easily. But it hasn't caused any issues yet." "That may be true, but that's not the point." As soon as I raised my voice, my boss came out and said, "Actually, that social media post was just discovered, and now our security team is handling it." "What?" We were all left speechless by what the boss said. It was over. I felt a deep sense of despair. "What have you done?" Tom and the other department heads were also blaming Betty. It was only natural. "I'm so sorry." Betty started crying again. However, everyone's anger remained. Saying sorry isn't enough. What if we lose our jobs because of this? Don't do something reckless when you're not in a position to handle the responsibility. We're the ones who have to take responsibility for your actions. At everyone's words, "I'll resign from the company," Betty said. But Jane stopped her. "Oh, You think you can just quit on your own. In this case, you're going to be fired. What? No company would let someone like you just quit voluntarily after this kind of mess. But it's not your decision to make. Betty, trying to stay strong. However, everyone exchanged glances and shook their heads. No matter how you look at it, this is going to end in termination. Everyone nodded at my words. This wasn't just a small mistake. Why? It's better for the company to tell our clients the employee was terminated for misconduct, and this won't happen again, than to say the employee just left. For the sake of the company's reputation, Betty's dismissal was pretty much guaranteed. Even though it meant she would still be leaving, the fact that she was being fired seemed to hit her hard, and she looked devastated. Paul's negligence is also a factor, Ben pointed out, causing Paul to go pale. He had never imagined he'd be dragged into this mess. Am I going to be fired too? I can't say for sure. Like Betty, Paul was left standing in shock, as if he'd just been doused with cold water. In the end, both of their lives had taken a terrible turn. After that, naturally, Paul and I got divorced. I also demanded compensation from both Betty and Paul. At the divorce party, both my parents and my in-laws were so stunned by how tragic everything had become that they were left speechless, while the employees were the ones making all the noise. Later on, when both families, Betty, Paul, and I sat down for a formal discussion, Paul's parents ordered him to repay me the wedding costs. And that wasn't all. The money for the wedding rings and other things we bought together had to be refunded as well. Paul's parents were angrier than mine. Since I had rented the house before Paul and I started living together, it was only natural that I would continue living there after the divorce, but they insisted on giving me money to cover moving expenses, assuming I wouldn't want to live in a house where Paul had been unfaithful. Although I felt a bit guilty, as his parents had done nothing wrong, they were adamant that I accept, so I gratefully took the offer. As for Betty, she was naturally terminated. Paul was transferred to a rural branch. His job now, filing paperwork, changing light bulbs, and cleaning the bathrooms. He wasn't given any real tasks. It was a dead-end position, a place where employees who caused problems were sent as punishment. It seems that he has to keep working to pay off the compensation he owes. Because the scandal was so big, people looked at him with cold eyes, and he spent his days feeling uncomfortable. He had fallen hard from being the star of the sales team. Even though he went through the trouble of getting a divorce, it looks like things didn't work out with Betty either, and they broke up. Affairs really do nothing but ruin people's lives. I learned that the hard way. Not that I would ever have the chance to do something like that. I thought about quitting my job, but my colleagues and my boss convinced me to stay, so I kept working at the company for a while. I had originally graduated from pastry school, so the desire to become a pastry chef started growing stronger inside me again. Back when I was job hunting, I couldn't get a single offer from any pastry companies, so I ended up taking this job. But now I was starting to feel like maybe I could get the right qualifications and open up my own bakery. After that, I threw myself back into studying pastries again, worked hard to get everything ready, and eventually switched careers to a pastry shop. I worked there for a while, and about a year ago, the owner praised the pudding I had made as a hobby and decided to sell it in the store. It turned out to be a huge hit, and this year, I'm opening my very own pudding specialty shop. Fortunately, the sister store of the shop I worked at runs a similar setup, so it wasn't as tough as starting from scratch. It's been a real blessing. At one point, I felt like Betty had thrown my life off track, but unexpectedly, I was able to achieve my dream much sooner than I thought. And now I'm happier than ever. No matter how old you are, It's never too late to start over. That's how I feel. Some of my old colleagues still come by my pudding shop. They've gone from being work buddies to real friends, and I want to keep nurturing those relationships. That's what I think about while making pudding every day.
I know our family is struggling with debt right now. If you get married, we can pay off the debt with the wedding contribution from your spouse's family. You're 18 now, old enough to marry. Marry Freddie. In other words, I was being told to marry that overweight man named Freddie, all for money. For a moment, I thought it was utterly unreasonable, but then I realized I had only two options. Either plunge into a hell of debt by refusing to marry or spend my life with Freddie. As these were the only choices swirling in my head, I remembered something. I was willing to do anything to get out of this house. The story goes back over a decade. My name is Felicity. I grew up being treated terribly by my parents. My father died in a car accident when I was 3. He was a very kind man, but Mom apparently didn't like him very much. I have no memories of being loved by Mom, probably because I resembled my father. Mom remarried just 6 months after my father's death. According to her, she had been involved with my adoptive father even when my father was alive. Mom and my adoptive father, who had betrayed my kind father, treated me horribly. I was treated as if I didn't exist, and my pleas were always ignored. It seemed to get worse after my sister Olivia was born. Mom and my adoptive father adored Olivia. Unlike Olivia, who received all of their love, I was always treated as an outcast. They did give me birthday presents every year, but they were small things like pencils or erasers, while Olivia got anything she wanted. Even at Christmas, Santa Claus never came for me. When I was little, I often cried alone, hugging my knees, thinking that Santa didn't come because I was a bad child. During those painful days, something happened. I was 7 years old. On a day when heavy rain was falling due to a hurricane, Olivia got a fever. My parents, who adored Olivia, were in a panic. My adoptive father told me to buy a sports drink for Olivia. Reluctantly, I went out in the pouring rain wearing a raincoat, but my small body struggled against the strong wind and heavy rain. Moreover, our house was in the countryside, and it took an hour to reach the nearest supermarket on my little legs. When I finally reached the supermarket after great difficulty, I was shocked. I couldn't find the wallet I thought I had brought. I might have dropped it when the wind knocked me down. As I was about to turn back, tears welling in my eyes, I suddenly heard, "Wait a minute," from my older brother. The high school student-like older brother said, "Are you alone? It's dangerous in this weather," in a kind voice. I burst into tears at his gentle demeanor and explained my situation. I desperately told him about my sister's fever and how my parents had sent me shopping, and the older brother seemed to understand my situation. "You don't need to look for your wallet. I'll help you with the shopping," he said, and he helped me with all my shopping. I had lost my wallet and couldn't pay a single dollar, but my older brother told me not to worry and even gave me the change. He also took me close to home in a taxi, and I felt the kindness of others for the first time in a long time. "Thank you, big brother," I said with all my heart as I got out of the taxi, and my older brother's gentle smile was very impressive. I, who had spent such a childhood, turned 18. When I was a child, I only felt constrained by being treated differently from my sister, but now, as an 11th grader, my problem is money. Mom and adoptive father were against me going to high school in the first place. Apparently, they thought it was a waste to spend money on me. But I insisted on going to high school, and the condition they gave me was that if I wanted to go to high school and stay at home, I had to put $1,000 into the family every month. The money I earned desperately from part-time jobs was consumed by living expenses. When I became an 11th grader, I had to study for college in addition to my part-time job, and I was very busy. Mom and adoptive father probably won't pay for my college. I spent all my time working and studying to get a scholarship. One day, Olivia, who had become an 8th grader, came home triumphantly and said to our parents, "Listen, listen! I got scouted by the entertainment industry." What Olivia put on the dining table was a business card from an entertainment production company I had never heard of. Mom and adoptive father said, "Olivia is cute, after all," and were delighted. "Olivia has a sparkle, so I thought something like this might happen." "Keep it up, Olivia. Having a daughter as a celebrity is great." "Way to go, Olivia. You're nothing like your big sister." "Well, of course. I'm much, much cuter than my big sister." Olivia, raised by parents who had always looked down on me and praised Olivia, compared herself to me at every opportunity. This time, she arrogantly asked, "You think so too, don't you, big sister?" I replied, "Yes." Because arguing would undoubtedly lead to trouble. Olivia was supposed to have joined an entertainment agency, but months went by without any contact. The parents, who thought it was strange that they were being charged for lessons and membership fees, found out that the entertainment agency was a fraudulent group and had already disappeared. All that was left for the parents was a debt of $20,000. The parents looked desperate, but I just calmly paid $1,000 to the family and focused on my studies. I won't spare any effort if I can get out of this house. With that in mind, I was working hard at my part-time job and studying. A few weeks later, when I got home, I heard an unfamiliar voice from the living room. Wondering what it was, I was about to go up to my room on the 2nd floor when I heard adoptive father calling me from the living room. Wondering what it was about, I peeked into the living room and found two unfamiliar men besides adoptive father. One was a man of the same age as adoptive father, and the other was a very fat man. As I was surprised by the size of the man sweating in the air-conditioned room, adoptive father introduced the two. "This is Mr. Newell. Say hello." "Ah, nice to meet you." As I hurriedly greeted them, the two men smiled and looked at me. Mr. Newell is a well-known large-scale landowner in this area, known to everyone. Why would such people come to our house? As I was puzzled, adoptive father said something outrageous. "Mr. Newell's son, Freddie, is your fiancé. Be polite." "What?" Startled, I raised my voice, and adoptive father, looking flustered, took me out into the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked adoptive father in a whisper, and he answered in a whisper as well. "You know we're in trouble with debt. If you marry, we can pay off the debt with a wedding contribution from their family. You're 18 now and can marry. Marry Freddie." In other words, I had to marry that fat man, Freddie, for money. I thought it was utterly unreasonable for a moment, but I realized I had only two choices. Either reject the marriage and plunge into debt hell, or marry and live with Freddie. As those were the only two options swirling in my head, I remembered. I was willing to do anything to get out of this house. Are you done talking? What do you think, Felicity? Will you marry our Freddie? Mr. Newell, who had been waiting in the living room, asked me anxiously. I answered with a smile. Yes, gladly. And so, I was to marry Freddie. That very day, I was told to live at Freddie's house right away and was kicked out of the house. With only my study materials, Freddie asked, "Don't you have any clothes or anything?" But I had never bought cute clothes. "That's all I have," I said. Freddie lowered his eyebrows and said, "I see. Mr. Newell, no, my father-in-law, was a well-known landowner whose name I had heard, but he was a very friendly person. His car drove through a large gate and into a vast estate. And it stopped in front of a solitary house. This is a separate house I built for Freddie when he got married, but Freddie couldn't find a spouse. I'm glad a wonderful woman like Felicity is marrying him. I live in the main house, so Felicity, you should live here with Freddie. With just a brief explanation, my father-in-law said, "Well, I'll leave it to the young couple," and left Freddie and me behind. Suddenly alone, I was a bit wary of Freddie, but he calmly showed me around the separate house. And he brought me to a spacious room furnished with furniture, saying, "This is your room, Felicity. The inside lock works, and if you're worried, don't hesitate to ask for a key change. I won't lay a finger on you, Felicity. I've told your parents that we'll cover your high school expenses. You should reduce your part-time job if you can. That way, you can study more. If you want to go to college, I'll let you go." I blinked at the unexpectedly good treatment. Freddie even said he had no intention of getting a marriage license, and that we would have a common law marriage, so I could go to another man if I found one I liked. Far exceeding my expectations, I inadvertently asked, "What is this marriage for? I feel like I'm the only one benefiting." I wondered if it was rude after I said it, but it would be troublesome if I were asked for something outrageous later. Thinking I should check just in case, I waited for Freddie's words, and he began with, "I might be meddling, but..." and then answered, "I thought you might be in trouble, Felicity. Do you remember when you went shopping on the day of the hurricane when you were little? We met then, but do you remember?" I was taken aback. There's no way I wouldn't remember. I still remember the face of the kind older brother from that time. I realized that if older brother gained weight, he might look like this. "Are you the older brother from that time? I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." It can't be helped since I've gained a lot of weight. Stress from becoming a working adult made me eat too much. But you haven't changed, Felicity. When my dad showed me your picture and asked if I wanted to marry you, I knew right away it was you. Are you still being discriminated against and suffering like your sister? Just like on the day of the hurricane, Freddie spoke to me kindly, and I nodded. Then Freddie smiled to reassure me. "It's okay now. You don't have to worry about money or being treated badly anymore. You can live freely in this house, okay?" Touched by Freddie's kindness, tears welled up in my eyes. In front of Freddie, who hurriedly handed me a beautiful handkerchief, I cried, and from that day on, Freddie and I started living together. I spent my first ever free time studying. I was so happy to be able to study for college like this. Freddie said he didn't need living expenses, but I decided to contribute only $300 because living for free felt constraining. Since I only had to earn $300 and my allowance, I was able to significantly reduce my part-time job hours. Freddie took the initiative in doing household chores, and when I was doing them, he would kindly say, "You can go study," and take over for me. In the happiest days of my life, Freddie and I gradually grew closer. We spent our days like an ordinary married couple, laughing together while watching variety shows and going out on holidays. A few months later, I was leading a calm life when I received a phone call from my adoptive father. What could he want now, after never worrying about me and leaving me alone all this time? I picked up the phone with a bad feeling. "Hello?
Felicity, is that you? Mom's in serious trouble."
I was taken aback by adoptive father's loud voice as soon as I answered the phone. According to adoptive father, Mom had fallen sick and needed immediate surgery, so he was calling to ask me to transfer $10,000 to a specified account. Mom had neglected me since childhood, but she was still my mom. Facing a life-threatening situation, I couldn't just ignore her.
What happened all of a sudden? Which hospital and what kind of illness?
When I asked out of concern, adoptive father hesitated, saying, Well, it's the hospital, but... I began to feel something was off as adoptive father suddenly became flustered. He couldn't even name the disease, which was clearly suspicious.
You're lying, aren't you? Enough, don't call me for such nonsense. Wait. Okay, I admit it, I lied. The truth is, I had an accident recently, and I'm being billed $10,000.
According to adoptive father, he had crashed his car the other day, and the person he hit was a scary guy. He was now being billed $10,000 for repairs and medical expenses, and he claimed he couldn't pay. My irritation with him grew.
You're probably lying again.
It's true this time. Please, Felicity. Ask Freddie to transfer the $10,000. You're all we have left. I snapped at adoptive father's desperate plea.
Don't mess with me. I can't believe you called after so long just to ask for money. Neither you nor Mom ever cared about me, not even once. And now you want me to help you? That's too convenient. No matter what you say, I have no intention of transferring the money. Goodbye.
Ignoring adoptive father's plea to
Wait.
I hung up the phone and blocked the numbers of adoptive father, Mom, and Olivia. A few weeks later, as I happened to pass by my family's house, I noticed it was vacant. A gossip-loving neighbor lady approached me, and from her, I learned that the story about hitting a scary guy's car was true. According to the neighbor lady, my parents and Olivia had secretly packed their bags and left the house at night. They must have fled and are likely living a hidden life now. Living in fear must be incredibly stifling. Thinking about it, I felt a sense of relief deep in my heart. Meanwhile, I was living happy days. I had completely fallen in love with Freddie. Though Freddie, who was 10 years older than me, was often hesitant about dating me, my persistent confessions led to a decision to start dating once I graduated from high school. Freddie even took time off work to attend my high school graduation ceremony. As he accompanied me in my eating and exercise habits, Freddie slimmed down to his original figure and transformed into a handsome man. My friends were envious when I proudly introduced him as my boyfriend. After my high school graduation, Freddie and I submitted our marriage registration to officially get married. When I said I wanted to marry, Freddie nodded in agreement, so we decided to submit the marriage registration. It would take a little time for the marriage certificate to be issued, but now we were officially a married couple, not just in a common law marriage. On the way home from the city hall, we held hands for the first time. I laughed at Freddie's adorable shyness, and he said, "Now that you're my wife, Felicity, you can't be swayed by any handsome boys you meet in college." I thought I was the only one in love, but it seemed Freddie loved me very much too. I found it so ticklish that I burst into laughter. There's no way that could happen. Out of all the people I've met, Freddie is the most handsome.